So you don't need me to tell you, but it is spooky season. Ollie and I are ready for Halloween. Doesn't she look adorable? That is a lot of noise for a little dog. Obviously, it is spring here in Australia, but I'm still trying to get into the mood, and I've been seeing everybody give their spooky, scary, thrilling book recommendations. Unfortunately, I am the world's biggest scaredy cat, so they're just not going to cut it for me. So today, Ollie and I are going to provide you with some suitably spooky and Halloween appropriate reads that won't keep you up at night. So basically, these are books that all feature Halloween-y type themes like witches and ghosts, but they're done in a bit more of a cozy, fun, atmospheric way rather than a scary one. And I'm going to start with the sweetest, least scary and work my way up to a little bit spookier, but nothing too intense. The first, and absolutely the mildest of the bunch, is Little Gem by Anna Zabel. This is a first in a fairly new junior fiction series here in Australia, and I think you can tell by the cover and what they're doing with the art, they're going for a classic kind of feel with this story. So this is a story about a young witch named Gem who doesn't always feel very confident in her capabilities. And so we meet her at the beginning of the book when she is at witch school and she's kind of practicing some spells for an exam that's coming up. One of the spells that she's been practicing is a transporting spell. And we meet her when she has just attempted to transport herself from one classroom to the next. However, she has accidentally transported herself many hundreds of miles away and 100 years into the future instead. Gem finds herself in a cozy little seaside town, and it turns out that the people of this town are actually in need of a witch's help. So she doesn't really know how to get back to witch school, and to be honest, she wasn't really even enjoying it very much anyway. So she figures while she's here, she might as well try helping the folks of this town out. They get up to some little adventures. The people of this town end up falling in love with Gem, and they give her the nickname Little Gem. We get cute little illustrations throughout the book that I think really add to the charm. And this is a book that is obviously targeted to children. It's great for kids who are just wanting to have a longer story read to them, but it's also great for kids who are starting to want to read on their own. So that sort of 5 to 7 age range I think it's perfect for, but I, as a 32-year-old woman, absolutely adored it. It's one of my favorite junior fictions that I've read of the year. I think it's so charming, so sweet, so adorable. I just loved the setting and I loved all the characters. It was just gorgeous. The way that it's written and the atmosphere of this seaside town, it definitely feels like an old long lost classic kind of a story. I would give Little Gem a spooky rating of literally 0. It's just wholesome and adorable goodness. Now book number 2 sort of straddles the line between junior and middle fiction. It's targeted towards readers aged 6 to 10, and that is Miss Mary Kate Martin's Guide to Monsters, The Wrath of the Wollington Worm by Karen Foxley, with illustrations by Frida Chu. Now this is just a proof copy. I'll put up the much lovelier final cover on the screen for you. In this story we don't really have witches, we don't really have ghosts, but we do have some curious unexplained phenomena that the locals are assuming has to do with some old folk tales. Our main character's name is Mary Kate, and she's a young girl with some pretty significant anxiety challenges. Her mother is an archaeologist, and so the pair of them have basically been called away to attend the town of Wollington. Wollington is sort of like a small remote town. It's kind of got like English vibes, although I think Karen Foxley is Australian, but basically there's some unexplained phenomena happening in this town. It all started when the mayor of Wollington decided to create a big shopping centre and a big parking lot. He thought that that would make all of the people from all of the surrounding towns come to Wollington. And the further along the shopping centre progresses, more weird stuff is happening, and a lot of the Wollington locals believe that it is the old legend of the area, the Wollington worm, that has come back and is sort of mad about the shopping centre being built on its land. So while Mary Kate's mum is off doing like the archaeology end of the investigation, Mary Kate decides that she is going to do a bit of investigating of her own. She starts interviewing the locals to better understand the myth and the legend around the Wollington worm, and she does some research at the library. She gets really into it all. And through this we learn about the history of the town, and things start to become clearer and even weirder than we might have suspected. It's a really fun little story, and although it does have this kind of spooky, uncertain element to it, Mary Kate, being such an anxious character herself, really grounds the whole situation. And I personally loved that representation of a young girl really like struggling with some of her anxiety symptoms, but also finding ways to cope with them too. Now, leveling up the spooky just a little bit more, we've got Temple Alley Summer by Sachiko Kashiwaba. This has to be my favorite cover of the bunch. I love it. Now, this is a middle fiction story, but it is very slow and atmospheric, so it's for a particular kind of reader. That particular kind of reader, I think, is me, because I really enjoyed this. In this story, we follow a young boy named Kazu, who lives in a small kind of regional Japanese town. And one night he's sort of awake in the middle of the night and he happens to see a ghost. This ghost is of a young girl about his age. He doesn't think too much of it until the next day he goes to school, and that same girl is now a student at school, except everyone else seems to think that she's always been there. Kazu seems to be the only one who recognizes her for what she is, and that is a ghost, and one that does not belong. I don't want to give too much away because this is definitely part ghost story, part mystery, and it's really incredible watching this all sort of slowly unfold as you go along. There's a great sense of atmosphere to this book. It's all kind of foggy and eerie, but I personally didn't feel like it ever crossed over into scary. Instead, it genuinely felt beautiful. I don't know if you can see, but some of the pages are black, and that is because there's a story within the story as well. Basically, during his investigations, Kazu stumbles across this old story that relates to what's going on now with this ghost, and so we get to read that story along with him. And that definitely adds to the sense of atmosphere and tension. I personally felt like it did drag the pacing out a little bit, but overall I still just really loved the experience of this book. It felt like such an all-consuming experience. It was so atmospheric and gorgeous that like I will just always remember this book fondly. So if you're looking for a cozy, introspective, atmospheric ghost story that ends up feeling quite heartwarming rather than scary, I think Temple Alley Summer is the way to go. Next up, we've actually got a manga title that I would like to recommend, and that is Hat Atelier. This is the first volume, and of course, this is witchy as hell. In this first volume, we meet a young girl named Coco who's always dreamed of being a witch, but she figures that that's sort of a power that you have to be born with, and she's old enough to recognize that she's probably not been born with that. She is, though, a very skilled tailor, and she lives at home with her mum. One day, though, tragedy strikes her family, and Coco is sort of forced to go off on this journey of actually becoming a witch so that she can save her mum. Although some of that does sound quite dark, this has overall quite a fun and light tone to it. It feels very Ghibli-esque to me. Again, there's a great sense of atmosphere throughout, and the art in this is some of the most beautiful art I've seen in a manga. It's just gorgeous. It's really detailed and just very, very pretty. I got a bit teary-eyed at one point just because of like both the story and the art just came together so well to just move me. I really, really enjoyed this. So if you're looking for a witchy story and perhaps maybe a graphic novel or a manga, but you don't want anything too scary, you want more of an adventure and like a coming of age story, definitely give this one a go. Okay, next up we've got another graphic novel. This is actually like a duology. It is The Curse of the Chosen by Alexis Deakin. This is volume 1 and volume 2. I think originally these were published in separate books and they were a bit smaller, but you can now get them in these 2 bind-ups, which I think is great and much more affordable too. I have to admit that I had honestly put off trying this out because the art is not what I would stereotypically be drawn to, I don't think. But I was curious, and so I picked it up a couple of weeks ago, and I'm really glad that I did. Also, a quick side note, I do think that there's a marked improvement in the art and in particular the colouring between volumes 1 and volumes 2. So it's quite fun to see that progression. Anyway, this is another adventure story that is a little bit more creepy. We've definitely stepped up the creepy scary factor slightly from the last book. This graphic novel series is intended or marketed at least to people aged 12 and up. And basically at the very beginning of the book we find out that the queen or the empress, whatever she's called, is dying or has just died. And so there's this kind of strange entity woman who we don't know a lot about at the beginning, who has been put in charge of finding her replacement. And to do so, what she has done is basically bring 50 people together and put them in a trial. And we find out that this trial is like compulsory and to the death. Basically, one person will remain alive. That is the intention. So the stakes are very high right from the beginning. So if you like that kind of trial games aspect to your stories, this one could definitely appeal. And although we do have 2 main contenders that become sort of like our primary characters, there is a pretty large like secondary cast of characters that we get to know quite well throughout the story too. Although we've got our main characters, it does feel like quite an ensemble piece, I suppose. And I really appreciated that. There's 3 main trials that the 50 contestants are forced to participate in, and they progressively get weirder and darker as we go along. The first one's pretty simple. Basically, they all get thrown to different ends of the kingdom and have to make their way back before a certain time. Seems simple enough. The second one escalates things very quickly. Stuff gets really weird and kind of creepy, but at the same time, there is a pretty strong sense of humor throughout as well. So it's one of those adventures that could be quite dark, but balances I think, the tone really well. So I didn't personally find it too scary. I found it a bit creepy, but not too scary. I would love to show you some examples of why I think this is a great Halloween read, but I feel like I might be giving things away. But basically, just to be super vague, there's a lot of references to death and like the balance between life and death. There's a lot of skull imagery, all of that good stuff. And honestly, even the castle that they're all kind of stuck in for most of the book, as we sort of progress through different rooms and things get weirder, it kind of feels like a little bit of a haunted house kind of vibe. It's not, but it kind of feels that way. And although I don't think she's ever called a witch, the main antagonist definitely gives some pretty serious witchy vibes. It's magical, it's adventurous, it's weird, it's a little bit funny. It's a really wild read. I enjoyed it. And then finally, we've got Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna Maguire. This is the first in the Wayward Children series by Shauna Maguire. It's like a short series of novellas that I don't think have to be read in order, but I'm the sort of person who is going to read them in order, and this was the first book. So this is the only one I've read so far. Basically, this is like a portal fantasy series, and we meet a bunch of children who have basically been whisked off to different portals through some doorways. Each of the realms that these children have been to are all very, very different. And in some way, they match the child who happened to fall through to these realms. However, we meet all these kids when they're back in the real world, and all of them are really struggling to fit back in. And so their parents have all sent them away to this boarding house that promises to, you know, straighten them out because their parents think they're all crazy, basically. However, the lady who's in charge of taking care of them at this house, she has also been through portals, so she understands what they're all going through. And so she's just trying to create like a happy, safe home for them all until, hopefully, at least for some of them, they might be able to go back to their portal realms. I honestly thought that this sounded cozy and adorable as hell, so I was quite surprised to find a strange kind of murder mystery thriller scenario within these pages. Basically, in this first book, we're introduced to a young girl who has been to some kind of like death realm. And not long after her arrival, one of the other people in the house unexpectedly dies. And so it becomes this kind of like whodunit thriller. And so it is pretty tense in a lot of ways. However, because there is that fantastical, almost like charming element, and all of the kids themselves I found really endearing. Although this can get a bit gory and intense from time to time, at least for me, it didn't push over onto that next level of scary that I don't like. It felt more curious and creepy and spooky than it did terrifying most of the time. And although I have seen this book described as YA, I don't really know how I feel about that, to be honest. I know the line between sort of the older end of YA and actual like adult fiction can be kind of blurry sometimes, and I think this book sort of fits almost uncomfortably between the two. Some parts of it certainly feel very YA, but at the same time, other parts certainly don't. And obviously there is like some gruesome sort of elements to it and some spookier elements. So there's definitely like trigger warnings where I wouldn't really have felt the need to provide too many with the other books. So if that's something you're worried about, definitely check those out. But if those other books didn't quite feel spooky enough for you, then maybe this one could be the right option for you this Halloween. So Ollie and I hope that you have found a read or two that might be suitable for your spooky level this Halloween. You make the weirdest noises. Are you just talking to the people? Anyway, Ollie and I, I think she's letting you all know that she's excited for Halloween, maybe, or that you're ready to play. Before I go, I have to say a big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon, and especially big thank you to Livia, Lynette Brown, and Marie. But that's all from Ollie and I this time. Happy Halloween, everybody, and until next time, happy reading. Bye. Bye.